Welcome back to the next panel session featuring EdTech specialists and UAE international private school leaders sharing their knowledge about digital governance, sustaining digital changes in UAE international private schools. I'm so pleased to introduce Chair Philippa Wraithmell, Director of Digital Learning at Cranleigh School, Abu Dhabi, to introduce the rest of the panel. Over to you, Philippa.
Thank you, Sarah. Hello and welcome to our leadership panel, as Sarah mentioned, for digital governance and how digital transformation is going to change the education sector in the GCC. I'm very pleased to announce our panel, who will introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about their role and what schools they work for. Andy. Well, we've had our first digital faux pas. Sorry, Andy, I think
Am I on now?
You're on, go.
I'm on. So, yeah, so good morning, everyone. My name is Andy Turner. I'm the Group Head of Education, Technology and Innovation for ALDAR Education.
And Hilary?
Hi, everyone. So, yes, I'm Hilary Hunt. I'm the Head of Learning at Victoria International. And I guess over the last 18 months, my principal focus on tech online and learning content. So, yeah, excited to be here.
Excellent. Thank you. Olly, welcome.
Thanks, Philippa. Good morning, everybody. My name is Olly Lewis. I'm Head of Science and involved in digital strategy and teaching and learning at the British International School of Abu Dhabi, and we're part of Anglia Education.
Thank you. And Linda?
Good morning, everyone. It's lovely to be here. I am the digital lead at Deira International Secondary School, and for the past 3 years, we've been developing our digital strategy and to empower our teachers and our students for future skills.
Welcome to all of you, and thank you so much for joining us today. So, as was mentioned earlier, I work at the Cranleigh School in Abu Dhabi, and I've been leading also digital strategies for the past 4.5 years. So today we're going to be looking at digital governance, something which I know all of us will be very au fait with in terms of looking at our schools and their strategies and the vision in which they're moving forwards with. But it's really important to be able to establish some changes that have happened, especially in the last 18 months, and how we are going to address those changes within our schools and our establishments to make sure that digital governance is always a priority. So we'll look at our first question. And I'll pose this firstly to Hilary. So how are you keeping the momentum in your school with all the changes going on globally within your own school setting?
Sure, okay. So I think the key thing I want to talk about is the fact that we've been dedicated for our teachers, really think about how we're training digitally. Well and good coming from a perspective of what you want to do, but unless your teachers are at a stage where they're ready to understand what you're saying, you don't actually have that. You have to be ready to hear what you're saying. And so before we start any training now, we really gauge where they are and where the trainers sit, so that we can really tailor our training to individual to the so as a result, we're moving away from that whole school mentality of teaching learning and digital learning in particular. That's partly because our regulations are doing that as well. We have to have our teachers at 0.5 meters. We only have about 15 in a room. So that whole school is delivering digital learning, professional learning. And number two, I would argue that it's not the right way to do it anyway. Just do that to students where we just lump learning the same way on our students. We develop individual learning, etc. So in terms of the momentum, we've been really clear that negotiables, certain platforms that everyone does need to have, and rather than doing post-school ELD, developing online modules in their own script. At the end of the day, it's teaching on a screen, and then you get a load of another hour of so that's been one of our strategies, putting modules in their own time.
Yeah, absolutely. In your own time is so important. It's something that we've been able to really sort of take by the hands now, hasn't it? It's something that we can actually allow our staff to have that time to be able to empower their own learning and decide what's relevant. And I think you've picked up on two sort of things there that are really important. I'd like to throw out to everybody else as well, which is one, actually, that not every member of staff needs to do certain things. And so actually making it more relevant will also make it more relevant to what they're doing and their thoughts on our professional development for them. But also that non-negotiables kind of stance on that. So I was wondering, Andy, you obviously, ALDAR Educations, you have a vast array of schools under your belt that you have to look after. How does that influence and impact your schools?
Yeah, so across our family of schools, where we have 20 at the moment, we have around just over 3,000 educators from over 100 plus nationalities. So we've been very lucky within our family of schools that for many years we've had a really robust technology professional development system in place. And what we found really key, especially during the current kind of global pandemic, has been our network of technology coaches. So we have over 40 technology coaches which are serving full-time teachers as well within all of our schools, and they've just been the cornerstone really of us being able to, straight away change this kind of different approach to our education across our schools. Last term alone, our network of tech coaches delivered over 2,000 hours of professional development and support for our network of teachers. So I would say, going to Hillary's point about the flexibility and your point as well, Philippa, about personalisation of CPD. We're doing that now even more so by looking at deploying a new learning management system across our schools, and instead of relying so much on face-to-face training like we've done in the past, like all schools really have done in the past, we're putting a lot of investment into our kind of digital CPD strategy moving forward.
And I think that's so important, especially in the way that we are now, and also across your schools, 3,000 educators, to be able to share that wealth of information is incredible. If we move across, I guess, Olly or Linda, if you're sort of in a smaller school, or they're your group, a part of a wider group within your school, how do you manage to nurture that within a smaller environment?
I think it goes back to what Hillary was saying right at the beginning. It's not the idea of you give a one-size-fits-all training and in-set training. And for the last couple of years, we found it to be really successful to give almost like a conference style, training, where you can choose what kind of skills, the skills you're good at, and at the moment we're all kind of at different levels. So giving you can choose which angle you approach your training, but then having the non-negotiables and what you said, by the end of this week, everyone needs to be able to communicate, to be able to collaborate, to be able to use OneNote, mark work, be able to give timely feedback, and then you then see these platforms that can help you. That's useful for us, and also it means it lends itself as well to putting everything, most things online. So things like OneNote extensively, and Microsoft Stream and Teams extensively to make the video, because we expect that to happen within the teaching classroom. So it's really got to happen, right from the right start.
Yeah, absolutely. Olly.
Yeah, everything that Linda, Andrew, Hillary, and yourself have said really does resonate, and I think what it quite often comes down to, regardless of the size of your organisation, is having the right operational systems in place for each individual so that you can drive future efficacy. Because I think that's quite often what it comes back to in a school, is if you have a staff body or an individual that doesn't have that level of confidence to deal with whatever technological issue they might face, whether it be pedagogically or kind of operational system of that tool, to deal with it on the fly in that situation, then that kind of doesn't become that self-fulfilling prophecy, as it were, across your organisation, with a weak link in the chain. So it's about having those systems that the UAE team have put in place that does meet the need of each individual, and that helps drive efficacy across your organisation, which of course not only impacts teachers but impacts students.
Absolutely, and I think most importantly, we have to think about the students and how it affects them, and we can't always just go back to the tool that we think is the best because we find it easy. I think that's a real big part about digital governance now, is that if you are working for a school and within that environment they're using certain systems and processes, there'll always be a why as to what's the reason behind that, and it really just comes down to the students and making sure that they're all seeing the same things, and that we're able to be able to deliver a certain standard and level of digital education as well as normal education, well, as education as a whole, I guess now. So that takes, I'm going to actually flick down to a slightly lower question because I think it's quite relevant. So I'll go back to Olly. So how have the visions of digital education changed over the last 18 months? And do you think that's a positive shift?
I do think it's definitely a positive shift. I think that more schools now have moved away from the kind of traditional leadership model of top down, and like Andy said, and I know it's happening in Linda's school and in our school, that kind of distributed leadership model, certainly for technology. And I think that can only be a good thing, because the more brains you have, the more ideas you can piece together, the best route you can find for all of the stakeholders in your organisation. So I think that's probably been a big shift for many schools, certainly over the last 18 months, and realising that. And then, going back to what we were sort of touching on there in terms of teaching and learning, is how do you then enact your philosophy for teaching and learning in your organisation digitally in a different ecosystem to what we might be used to, and how do you go about upskilling your staff to kind of bring that alive for the students?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that does come back as well. I mean, the whole digital governance comes back to, if you do use a distributed leadership model, it becomes very effective because everyone feels that they're part of that and everyone feels that they are a stakeholder within that. Hilary, how do you feel that the vision has changed over the last 18 months for your school?
Well, I would agree, definitely. Again, there's a lot more leadership being opportunity for our middle leadership team members. Our faculty heads are taking far more of a role in terms of deciding the pathway that fits best for their area, because obviously we can deliver something around hybrid learning, for example, but what I deliver for a math teacher may not work for a humanities teacher, for example. So there's far more agency now, I think, within our teachers and within our middle leadership team to take a role within the digital leadership team. There's opportunity. I think more people are putting their hands up to essentially work as ambassadors within their teams as well. We have digital pioneers who, they volunteer to be part of a PLC around digital learning, and they're starting to lead, they're leading staff workshops, etc. I think the other thing for me is actually the role of parents and students, and actually guiding as well. There's far more transparency now, because let's be honest, the parents have far more access to our classrooms than they did beforehand. And so a lot of our vision has actually been guided by communication with our parents now as well, whereas before it may have come from a school knows best. We have to listen to our parents now, because they're seeing the classroom, they're working with their students if they're at home, with their children if they're at home. And so I think that's the other side of how our vision has changed, is the parental guidance.
Excellent. And Linda, how would you say the last 18 months has affected the change at Deira?
Well, we started off like our digital strategy saying that basically it was saying that we're going to empower students to become like the global leaders of tomorrow, and all these big fancy ideas and words and stuff. But essentially people looked at the digital strategy as a means to access academic learning, and that was bluntly pretty much it. We did that pretty well, but it wasn't the whole picture. And very quickly we found that during coronavirus, there was there needed to be within the vision, how do we communicate with the parents, and not just through academics but well-being as well. How do we train up the parents and stuff, and also how do we train up the students and the teachers to be ethical online, so you're ethical leaders as well as empowered leaders, so you're using that power ethically. And I think actually coming out of coronavirus and into our hybrid learning times, that's become even more relevant, because if you're, I know that I've personally struggled with, if you're 100% online, you can 100% engage with, like, or sympathize with, like, you know, the people, or empathize, I guess, with like the students or the teachers that are online. But if you're in a hybrid learning environment and everyone's doing different things, you may not see, like, you know, that well-being side. You may not see that side immediately to them, and they might find it difficult to communicate. So I think our vision has more kind of gone down that route now, to encompass well-being.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of schools will have gone in a really similar direction. I think parent communications and actually training parents and supporting parents to understand how to use certain platforms has been really important to this whole process. And parents an insight into what our children are doing in school and at home. One thing that I quite like is that you kind of don't have that dog ate the homework anymore, and when a parent does come to you and says, but my child handed it in, you have the digital proof now that they perhaps did not. And so actually some of those communication methods have become much more fluid. I know that our school and many others have been really enjoying doing parents' evenings online, and actually being able to use and curate a lot more information about those children because of the way that things have changed. So I would totally agree in terms of the communication. I'm going to go to Andy, and I'd like to ask you the same question, but also linking it into how you managed to get that joined up thinking and the vision of the strategy across all of the academy schools that you lead, and how that kind of links in with every single part of that ecosystem, because obviously, as we know, digital governance is part of not only teaching and learning, but it's actually part of the structure and the safeguarding of the school as well. So how have the last 18 months really changed that for you?
I'd say the last 18 months really has put kind of education technology kind of under the spotlight, not just within the UAE, but globally as well. And I think most organizations have kind of accelerated their digital transformation strategies over the last 18 months. And there's been a lot more investment within the sector, definitely. With our own family of schools, you know, we've invested over $2.7 million in terms of accelerating our online learning initiatives. And I'd say in terms of digital governance and making the strategies across our family of schools, really it's, as Olly said there, in terms of distributed leadership at school level, but also the collaboration between all stakeholders. It's really, really important when you're trying to make any initiative, be that a new literacy initiative or a new approach to mathematics in your school or your education group, that all stakeholders are on board and they all play a part in kind of organically growing that initiative. So for ourselves, straight away, we've involved our staff, students, and our parents in terms of our digital strategies. And our approach has always been, right from the offset, is having, it makes more work because you're literally taking, in our case, say 20 individual strategies, and then you're making a group-wide strategy. But that way, everyone's valued, all their opinions are valued, and you get a more richer and more in-depth piece of work at the end of it. I don't think the right approach is always having, say, one strategy for X amount of schools, be that 1 or 20 or 50. Each school is its own individual family and its own kind of demographic. And I think taking on board all stakeholders' views and opinions and values and beliefs, that's the way you make a really competent and efficient and effective short, medium, and long-term plan for your schools.
No, I couldn't agree more. I think it really is about the demographics and the actual cohorts that you are looking after, isn't it? And it's so brilliant to definitely recognise the fact that every school is different, and you as a leader going, you know, we need to take the best parts of this for the strategy for the whole group. However, that understanding that not the same platform will work in every single school, and that's okay, as long as we're working to the same vision, that is that students are able to use digital technology, that teachers are able to use it, and that we're reducing workload, and we're actually making sure that we're being much more savvy and being able to instill some of these different values in our students. How has the vision of kind of safeguarding in academics come across in your school, Olly? Have things changed? Has there been a kind of a different level of understanding been raised by this?
I think so, yeah. It comes back to lots of points that Andy mentioned, and one that Linda mentioned there, not only about agency among the staff, but that well-being in the community for all of those stakeholders. And, you know, our school's hugely collaborative anyway, but this has certainly been another catalyst, I think, for the last 18 months to driving that collaboration. And on top of that, measurement, because I think it is important that you measure where you are where your community and all of those different demographics in that community are. So I think we've probably measured more than we ever have, and I think that that's a really good thing, because it gives you, the temperature of each of those cohorts or different stakeholders across your community. So I think that's probably been a large change for us, certainly in that time frame, but also measuring the impact of various systems that we have in place and resources that we have in place, because like most schools, 18 months ago, there was a massive surge or acceleration in the uptake of new resources without probably the measurement prior to the pandemic, just to plug any gap that you might have found. But I think we've been really mindful of not introducing too much too quickly, but measuring what we have introduced to make sure that it has influenced and impacted the right parts of our stakeholder community.
Yeah, and I think that is really important. I think for myself, I've always kind of battled against this apps versus platforms and software, and too much and too little with staff, because we get excited and people come along with apps, and I found this and I want to use this, and etc. And actually I think the last 18 months has really allowed staff to go, there's some incredibly powerful tools, but I don't need to use all of them, and actually this is really relevant for this year group, and actually not so much for that sort of set of students. And we're actually able, exactly like you say, to be able to measure the impacts of those different things, and say actually too much technology isn't always the best outcome for us, and actually maybe we just think about it more simply, which I know in our schools where we kind of have this structure of very specific things that we use in different year groups, and then within the rest of that, within the classroom, within the year teams or the actual subject specific groups, they're able to choose things that will have an impact within their specific subject area, and that will be able to actually empower those students more, because it isn't, for me, it is always about less is more with digital technology. Hilary, how about your school? How has the changes in safeguarding and academics developed over this time?
Well, I'm just going to apologise. I keep on dipping it in and out. I hope I managed to stay on it. Essentially, again, we're really emphasising collaboration and key stakeholders. I guess to add to this, we have a really key group of students now that actually help us direct a lot of our safeguarding. What we find, especially you're online with kids, we're seeing a lot more screens turning off, etc. And so sometimes those digital leaders can get through to those students who are struggling a lot more than what we can do as teachers. So really making sure that they are key stakeholders and that they have representation and that they have a voice, so that when we're putting strategies in place, they're helping, they're informing us as well. It's not just coming from that teacher perspective of what's happening on the screen, for example. So I guess, that would be the one thing that I really think is important.
That's incredible, and what a brilliant way to continue to use your digital leaders within your school, because I know we've been trying to set them up at the school that I'm at the moment, and it is really difficult to get them all to be able to be participating in and feel really like they have a leadership role within the school. They do, unlike what they would normally be doing if we were back face to face and able to mingle around, but that's incredible.
I think it's interesting because what we've seen is that digital leaders have actually really on a powerhouse, whereas in the past, our student rep, etc., those digital leaders are now actually the people who are really coming to the forefront and guiding safeguarding for our students, guiding how we're doing pedagogy. It's great if you can manage it. It's great.
Yeah, it sounds absolutely incredible. I know that we did some student learning walks a few weeks ago because we didn't want staff to feel that they were being targeted about the digital use that they were doing. Lots of people have come and humongous leaps and bounds over the last 18 months from not using any technology in the classroom at all to be using it every day in every lesson. And actually it was so incredible to hear our digital leaders and our students really talking about the things that have benefited their educational experience the most and what they really enjoyed. Because then that's actually empowered us to find more digital staff leaders as well, because actually going to someone and saying, oh, did you know that they love when you do this? And this is a great way of engaging them. It's been really fantastic. I love that idea. I may go and steal that, Hilary, as an additional task for my digital leaders to be doing. I'd like to come to Linda with that final kind of question, but also looking at how the patterns of leadership have changed. And that's a really nice link on from what Hillary's been saying about student leadership, but actually leadership within the schools and the recognition of digital leadership and how important it is to the vision and the strategy of the school.
Yes, so I had to think about like how I would do this, and like I wanted to do like the whole before and during and after bit, but just before I start it is like what you've all been saying, like throughout this webinar, it's the idea that digital leadership is not just about one person, and digital leadership should be like led from different facets, like and that's the most effective. It doesn't matter which school you're in, it doesn't matter kind of like what platform you're using, like mainly it's about digital leadership is all about giving a voice to the people that really matter, so that you all move forward coherently. So before the pandemic, we had in our school kind of like the idea that like the digital leaders were probably going to be the computer science teachers. So I'm a biology teacher by background, okay, so I do have biology science teacher in my title, okay. So like when I started like talking about digital leadership here, the number of new teachers that genuinely thought I was a computer science teacher, and the number of times I've like talked to other people and they're just like, oh, but you're a computer science teacher, therefore you can code. But it's not about that, it's about like teaching using digital means. So that was kind of like a big thing that like was there like 2 years ago, that like was kind of driving the opinions of teachers, and therefore because it's computer science, it's like it's not part of French or it's not part of history. So like you use the occasional Kahoot or you use the occasional Quizlet to play a game, but there's no kind of link to learning there. There's no real link, conscious link to learning. And coupled with that, in most schools about 2 years ago before the pandemic, you would see like digital leaders as someone who is primarily just a teacher. I say just a teacher with full respect to all teachers, but like there's no link. There's no link between like the finance of the school, or like the admin side of the school, or the parental communication, or even a website. Like the school website is the first thing that parents see, but like that's not seen as, or that wasn't seen as something that was for digital education, which was nowadays we kind of think, how did we even do that? Like how do our schools even like even run on a day-to-day basis? So then we went into during the pandemic. Okay, that's very quickly changed, and the digital leaders, whether or not like you had one person or the computer science department, or a person that was in admin that was predominantly like doing it, or like you had an educational technology lead that actually was a teacher or group of teachers, they were suddenly in the spotlight. And it is what Andy was saying like earlier, like educational technology platforms were in the spotlight, and how we use them for the first time in the majority of the teachers was suddenly seen as, this is a tool for learning, this isn't just a gimmick, this is a tool for like in learning like immersively, and it isn't just like a an augmented reality thing that we have to do to tick a box. Like so we had like the accountability there as well. So like with all the teachers, like you suddenly were accountable for how you're using technology in order to link it to learning, and that made our learning for the great majority of us more effective, because we're a resilient bunch. And that then kind of went into like how do we communicate with parents? Like we need to tighten this up. How do we communicate with teachers? Because it's pointless like emailing or doing Teams meetings at like 10 o'clock at night, and it's not fair. So like that's where the ethics of it came in, like and the policies were tightened up predominantly because of the pandemic, like because people were burning out. When we came afterwards, so it's like kind of like, what are we actually doing now? And it is completely different now, because we're still on hybrid learning. Like there's still teachers that are at home, there's still teachers that there's still students that can't access bricks and mortar school. So we've had to keep all of that and also improve it. So it's the idea now of what all of you were talking about, like it's the student agency has really come to the fore for pushing the digital strategy forward, because those are the people that are going to be able to train the students on what they actually really need, because they can say it in the most concise and relevant way to them. And also it's the idea of what Philippa said earlier. I kind of wrote down a quote, so I'm just trying to find it. But you said like, not all tools are equal for everyone, and it's the idea that training now, because of the digital strategy, like so looking at it from a whole school point of view, from primary all the way up to secondary, even though you're using, for instance, ISAMs, you'll use ISAMs differently for communication, or Seesaw differently for communication in primary, and it will be a completely different way of communicating with the parents in secondary, and that needs to be respected. Just because you have platform there, you need to be able to use it in a way that's most efficient for the teachers, students, parents, and also for the state, like the big stakeholders, like teachers and stuff, to be able to communicate effectively. So basically, sorry, there's one more thing that I wanted to say. Like, nowadays, digital strategy is very much seen as not just a bolt-on. It's not just a tick box. It's not just something that you do just because you're being observed. It very much is. But you are excellent at teaching and learning because you can use digital excellently. Like, it's not separately. It's now not separate to teaching and learning. Like, it's become non-negotiable, and people are recognizing that more and more. And with that comes an upskill, like for the whole school.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think and that's where this leads back into that digital governance though, isn't it? Is that all of this information that we've been looking at, and something Olly was touching on earlier as well, is actually about gaining that information and curating that together and working about what that looks like for your school. So pre-pandemic, if you didn't have any digital strategy, and you didn't have any digital governance running through your school, actually now is the time to go, what works? What's going well? What do our teachers like? What do our parents like? What do our students most of all like? And how can we really embed that within teaching and learning, and to make and drive our school further forwards, to make it the best school possible for all those people that are part of our community? Olly, how about you? How has the leadership structure, or even just the relevance of digital governance changed within your school?
I think that what lots of people have been really mindful of, not only in my school, but in this group is, and Andrew touched on this earlier, is, an overly complicated strategy is not going to offer you flexibility. I think it's really important that we are flexible in this time. An overly complicated strategy is just going to disenfranchise your community. So, keep it simple, I think, has been the message for us. You just touched on one point there, which is, assign value to things. Would anyone notice if it wasn't there? If it disappeared overnight, would it make a difference? And alongside with that, know your starting point. And I think what we've been really fortunate in our school, and in this group actually, in our group of schools, is that we've communicated with other professionals and other schools outside of our own organisation to find out what's working for them in their context and how might that be applied to us. And not only can that be transferred into your own context, but it ensures that there's that true element, like we talked about earlier, in terms of agency and efficacy of co-creation in the broadest possible sense, not only in our school, but across all schools in the region. And then going a whole circle back to something that Andy said earlier about investments. There's an investment of time, like Linda put in there, as well as a financial implication. So is your strategy sustainable? Because I think that's the most important thing. It shouldn't just be something that's for the first 18 months and then disappears. It needs to be long term with longevity, factored into all of those things. So that's kind of we are and our take on it currently.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love the context of actually collaborating with the schools. I remember when I first became a teacher, that was such a shock. You don't want to go and talk to them. They might, find out something we do, which is really great, which I think is brilliant. I've loved that about living here and working in the UAE, is something that the sharing culture is definitely such a big part of that. So Andy, are there any changes to the leadership or anything that's going to be changed potentially within your group of schools that wouldn't perhaps have happened if it hadn't been for the pandemic?
No, I think that Linda and Olly have come up with some great points there. I'd say that really, we've already said that during the last 18 months there's been an acceleration regards to digital initiatives both in the UAE and internationally as well. And I think what we've done is we tried to build in time for reflection, and it's been really, really hard because we've all been going 1,000 miles an hour, to react to obviously what's been happening over the last 18 months. But we've actually taken our teams out and sat down and said, what can we do better here? And sometimes, as Olly said, sometimes it's the simplest things that make the biggest impact. So, we're looking at, fine-tuning the workflows between all of our different teams, looking at the platforms that we have. I think, especially during the last 18 months, I think there's been a bombardment of different platforms being used by some schools, but then you think actually, all the training to use them effectively and efficiently and to use them over an extended period of time, do we really need them? or are we just overcomplicating the digital ecosystem of our schools? So I'd say the biggest change for us has been that we've re-looked at workflows. We've re-looked at kind of permissions and who needs to sign off on what kind of area, and really kind of seeing that in terms of digital transformation, it has to involve so many different stakeholders. If you're looking at, implementing a new immersive environment within a school, involved, our education team, our education technology team, our IT team. So we've spent a lot of time fine-tuning the approach that we do for all those different kind of boring back-end things to make sure we can fully support all of our teachers to really, focus on what we're all here to do, to impact student learning and add value and give them meaningful learning experiences. So I'd say the last 18 months has really left us looking at those and simplifying things. And it's, I think the changes are really, really positive.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Andy. Oh, I was about to go to Hilary. I was hoping that I think we might have lost her again. As we come for our closing question, I guess it's not really a question. It is more about our hopes and what we would like to see from the future of this. If I just start with, I think for me, the biggest part of this is I hope that we don't just turn devices off and put them in the back corner, because actually I know that the amount of time which we've all reflected on and training and money that we have put into being able to develop such incredible strategies, which perhaps for some were developed under duress and stress of having to go remote, but actually the things that have flourished and been able to be produced because of that would be such a great shame to then lose. But for me, it really comes back to that, making sure that people are, and with the best will in the world, held accountable. You can't have that teacher who doesn't use technology anymore in their classroom when everyone else is, because is that the right experience for that person's class? And is that fair on those students who aren't getting that experience that everyone else in the school is getting? It is part of our world, it's part of our lives now. And from my perspective, I think, we need to keep it within the realms of what we feel is right for our establishments and what's right for our own ecosystems. So Hilary, I'm not sure if you heard that, the last little closing thing is what would you like, what are your hopes for the future post-pandemic of digital education?
Hopefully this last
I'm not sure if I've frozen now. No, okay, I'm going to throw over to Andy. He looks like he's got his microphone on.
I was just about to say, Philippa, we can hear you.
Okay, good.
So I would say my hopes are that we keep the momentum and the kind of the change and the positivity in regards to technology and the value we can add to all aspects of pedagogy moving forward. I think Linda mentioned it before, and I think Olly did as well, that in the past, sometimes technology is seen as a bolt-on or a nice sparkle to have within our schools. And there's been numerous advocates over the years, saying actually, we need to, really embed it within our curriculums. And I think a lot of work has been done over the last 18 months to change the mindsets and build that positivity, not just within the UAE, but internationally as well, about technology, that it's not just a bolt-on, it should be an integral kind of stream within all aspects of your school. So I'd love for that to continue. I'm sure it will. But also in terms of some of the platforms and whatnot and the training that we offer within K-12, I think that the last 18 months has shown us that some of the practice, say, in higher education in terms of distance learning, we've been doing in a lot of our schools, especially within the UAE and internationally, 100% online at times. And it's tapping into the research and adding value to that body of knowledge as well about distance education in K-12. So I'd love for that to develop in the future decade.
Brilliant, thank you. Linda, let's throw over to you.
In the next couple of years, I guess my hope is that every school is going to have or recognize that they need their own digital unique ecosystem towards their communities. And I think that's what everyone's been saying here, this in this panel, it's really important to not just copy and paste it from someone else. And then on top of that, have those digital strategies not platform based. So like in the next couple of years, like knowing that every student is getting the experience of almost transcending the platform and like looking at the skills as opposed to like focusing on the platform. So it's not like, oh, I'm going to go on Google Slides. Or it is more, I'm going to collaborate on my learning by using this skill, because essentially, like, you know, you can do that on many different platforms, but it's still the same skill of collaboration. So more of a focus, I guess, like my hope is that there's going to be more of a shift and focus on talking about and pioneering collaboration and creativity and all of those words before you say, oh, this is Seesaw, this is great, although Seesaw is great, like this is Seesaw, this is great, like kind of thing. Yeah.
Ollie.
Agree with Linda and Andrew on that, really, and I really hope that we've managed, not only as a region but globally, to bridge the gap, I think, the digital skills gap, not only as teachers but for many students. And I hope that, you know, post-pandemic, we don't go back to that, where there is more of a divide in that digital skills gap. So I hope that the momentum continues with that, and it's pervasive across education. I'd like to see more of a focus on digital citizenship across the region and globally, and tap in really to what Andy said about really finding out what's worked, the research behind it, the impact of all of the data that many schools and companies will have collected over the last 2-3 years, and in the next 2-3 years, to actually find out the influence and impact of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And that will really pull along anyone who really isn't on board still, because actually when you've got the proof, that's a really amazing way to be able to do that. Hilary,
I'm going to try.
bedtime. Let's do it.
Basically the same as everyone else has spoken to, you know, moving forward, keeping the processes that we put in place in the last meeting, not going backward to what we consider normal. This is teaching now, and what we've proved to ourselves is that we can adapt and change. Why would you not use the things that you've learned in the last 18 months? And really that focus on transformational leadership in terms of digital learning, the ability, that agency, teacher agency, the ability to choose their own adventures in terms of what they need in their professional learning, particularly to do with digital devices, digital tech, etc. That's what I hope that we continue moving forward on.
Brilliant. What an amazing way to finish as well. Thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for joining us today for our Sustaining Digital Changes in the UAE.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, guys. That was so interesting. And I think so many sort of pieces of advice for our audience out there. So thank you again.